I have 2 weeks of reading to squeeze into one video. Hello, welcome to my channel, another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg. Unfortunately, the other week I was sick and could not put out a reading wrap-up video. So I am squeezing 2 weeks into one, so I'm going to be a little hurried going through my description of each book. I'm also separating out these books into format. I will first talk about the print books that I read, then the digital books, and end up with my audio books. The first book I finished was Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, originally published in 1884. I read it in this fancy schmancy Library of America slipcase edition. This is almost certainly Mark Twain's masterwork. It is also a candidate for the great American novel. I will be mentioning a little bit more about the American great novel in a little bit. And this novel is frequently banned. I read this as part of the I'm with the Band book group run by MJ at Reading This Life. We are reading one banned book per month, and I have to say, for the most part, I am really enjoying these banned books. But why is Adventures of Huckleberry Finn so frequently banned? A lot of people assume it's because it's the frequent use of a now racial slur. It really was not a racial slur back when Mark Twain wrote this book, and it's quite obvious that Mark Twain is not a racist himself. So why was this book banned? I have a few theories. I think there are some more critical issues in this book. Huckleberry Finn may not be the type of boy some moral parents would want their children learning from. Huckleberry Finn has a conscience. Despite being not so well educated, he has a good sense of what is right and wrong. It may not be a huge surprise, but this story centers on Huckleberry Finn traveling down south on a raft with a slave named Jim. Huckleberry Finn wants to get Jim to freedom. And yes, going down south is a bit of a plot difficulty, but we'll let that one slide for now. But at one point in the story, Jim has been captured, and Huckleberry Finn is faced with a moral dilemma. His Christian upbringing, what little there was of it, because he's not really a staunch Christian, but his Christian upbringing tells him he must tell Jim's former owner, the widow Douglas, I think that's her name, has been captured down south. And he's writing her this letter to inform that. But he knows that could lead to a whole lot of issues for Jim. He is a runaway slave, and his future may not be so great once he reports to the widow Douglas. But he's doing the Christian thing by writing a letter to his former owner saying where she can find Jim. But his conscience is bothering him. What is going to happen to his friend, Jim? And Jim is his friend, despite being a slave. And all of a sudden, he gets this idea. All right, then, I'll go to hell. And that is what I think is one of the greatest moral proclamations in American literature. It's Huck deciding that this Christian upbringing is not as important to him as saving his friend Jim, Jim's life, Jim's well-being. To secure that is worth being sent to hell. And that should be lauded greatly. But I can imagine a parent, perhaps a religious parent, a Christian parent, deciding that that's not a lesson they want their children to learn. So they ban this book. And they may say, we're banning it because it has a racial slur. And why the racial slur can be a bit off-putting to a modern reader. I remember when I first read this book as a sophomore at the University of Maryland. I was taking one of those surveys of American literature classes. It was called something like American Literature After 1860. Not quite sure of the exact title, but you get the idea. We read The Great Gatsby, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. We read some Ginsberg, some Kate Chopin, but the author was an African American. And he stated in the first class, when we started reading this, you're going to come across a word that is no longer polite, but it is not used the way it was used back then in the 80s as a racial slur. It was just a term to refer to men of African heritage. And he was fine with it. Now, maybe he really wasn't fine with it. Maybe inside he was doing that Mother Courage silent scream, teaching this class of mostly Caucasian young people about a racial slur that deeply offended him. I don't think that was the case. I think he thought it was a great American novel, perhaps the great American novel. And this book is something that everyone should read. The end of the book has a lot of issues. As I've said in other videos, Mark Twain lost the voice of Huckleberry Finn in his writer's mind, and so he had to insert the character Tom Sawyer into the book. And once Tom Sawyer enters this book does get downgraded a bit. I still think it could be the great American novel, despite its flaws. It is a great novel. Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. This is the memoir chosen for People April. People April is the event run by Elizabeth at Bookins and Books, along with a few other co-hosts. It is to encourage people to read biographies and memoirs, and this was selected as the group's read of the month. It is the story of a British woman. It is set in the beginning during the pandemic. She owns a converted barn outside of London. I think it's a number of hours out, not something you would commute to daily, but during the pandemic, she's staying there. And one evening or one morning, she's wandering her lands, and she sees an abandoned baby hare. Its mother is nowhere to be seen, and she's struck. Should she try to save this hare or let nature take its course? She decides, I'm just going to take in this hare overnight and then see if I can reunite it with its mother the next day. Well, things don't turn out quite that way, and she hand feeds this hare with kitten milk, and she decides also to try to keep this hare wild. She doesn't want a hare as a pet. She wants the wild animal to survive. And this memoir is all about her ponderings on what it means to be a civilized human raising a wild animal. At points, I think she gets a little pretentious with her choice of keeping this hare as a wild animal. I knew if I raised a wild animal like a hare, I would almost certainly keep it if possible, possibly release it if it was able to. And she was able to reintegrate this hare into the wild, so I can feel for her. But I also would feel very strongly attached to this hare. She is attached too, but not the way I would be. I would see the hare as somewhat of a pet, the way I look at my cats. Now, my cats are more than just pets, they are members of the family, and this hare does integrate with her household in a rather unique way. My digital reads The Man in the Queue by Josephine Tey, originally published in 1929. It is the first in a series of 6 novels featuring Detective Inspector Grant. It starts outside a West End show. There is a large line, a queue, to get into this closing night performance, and the crowd is so packly tight. There is a woman complaining to the man behind her, "Stop crowding me." And the woman moves forward, and the man behind her falls over to the pavement. He has a knife in his back. And that starts off the murder investigation because at first, nobody knows who this murdered man is, and it's up to Detective Grant to find out not only his identity, but who killed him. And it is a very satisfactory murder mystery. It is not gruesome, it is not thrilling, but it does move you along as Detective Grant slowly peels back the onion and the details and gets to the murderer, or I should say, the identity of the man and the murderer. I have Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, originally published in 1883. It is the most famous pirate novel ever written, and it is a thrilling adventure yarn. I picked this up as a reread because I am a co host for Spring into Adventure. Spring into Adventure is an event from April to May encouraging people to read adventure fiction. And Treasure Island is quite the adventure story. There is a young man, or should I say, he's still really a boy. He is the narrator off the seacoast of England, and he meets up with a pirate, Long John Silver. And there is, of course, a treasure map to an island, and he hires out with some other folk to go to this island. Long John Silver is supposedly just the cook, but there is much more to this story, and it is where we get our pirate mythology from. If I am not mistaken, everything we think we know about pirates is really coming from Treasure Island. And what a thrilling book. It was my second time reading it. Someday, maybe I'll read it for a third time, but Robert Louis Stevenson is really such a fabulous storyteller. It was originally called a boys' book, but I don't see it as a story for boys because I'm 60 years old, and even though the narrator is very young, I don't feel like this is boys' fiction. It is an adventure story. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, originally published in 1925. April 15th was the 100th anniversary of its publication. and it is a candidate for the great American novel. There may be a number of reasons for that. First of all, Fitzgerald was a beautiful prose writer. There are some sentences in The Great Gatsby that just sing on the page. There are some great images in the book. Gatsby at night, staring at the green light over the water. There are a lot of parties in this book. Too many parties, if you ask me. I think there is a little bit of filler in this story, especially in the early chapters. But this book will wind up with a full punch of literary power. It would not make it to my great American novel list. I would give Huckleberry Finn the nod above Great Gatsby, but that is a personal preference. And of course, Brave New World Revisited by Aldous Huxley. This is a collection of essays published in 1954, and it is about Huxley reviewing his ideas from his novel Brave New World. Brave New World was a dystopian novel that he published in the early 30s. And it's all about how governments can become authoritarian and what methods they would use to create this dystopian authoritarian regime. Some of his ideas are a little outdated. He does harp a lot about overpopulation and lack of food supply. I think for now we've settled that. But for him, overpopulation was a huge, major concern. And he has other ideas that are just not quite up to modern times, but there are parts of this book that are eerie and disturbing because you can say, these apply today. How close are we to an authoritarian regime now? Let me read you the final summary paragraph. Meanwhile, there is still some freedom left in the world. Many young people, it is true, do not seem to value freedom, but some of us still believe that without freedom, human beings cannot become fully human, and that freedom is therefore supremely valuable. Perhaps the forces that now menace freedom are too strong to be resisted for very long. It is still our duty to do whatever we can to resist them. Yes, we do need to resist the forces of authoritarianism in 2025 in the United States of America. How shameful it is for me to have to say that. My audiobooks, The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher, A Shocking Murder and the Undoing of a Great Victorian Detective by Kate Summerscale. This is the story of a murder that shocked Victorian sensibilities. In 1860s, a child was murdered in its country home, and a London detective was sent after the fact to see if the murderer could be uncovered. This detective, Jonathan Jack Witcher, was a modern man, a modern detective for his era. And he did go through the way you would expect somewhat modern police to go through. But he wasn't quite up to snuff. Some of his conclusions would not hold water in a modern court, and they didn't even hold water back in 1860. But this detective was the model for many famous fictional detectives, whether you go to Wilkie Collins or Charles Dickens. He was what the Victorian mind thought of as a police detective. And it is an interesting story. And in reality, no one will know who murdered this child. There are many ideas, and of course, Kate Summerscale came up with her own theory about how this murder was committed and who the murderer was. Is she correct? I can't say that she was wrong, but it is good modern journalism making use of historical facts and coming to a new conclusion. I thought it was a very effective book. The Huntress by Kate Quinn. This is a selection from my in-person book group. It is a historical thriller novel. There are 3 storylines. My favorite storyline took place in World War II. There was a young woman growing up in Siberia near a vast lake, and she had a lot of issues with her abusive father. And she runs, and she discovers flying. She becomes an amateur pilot. And then when World War II starts up, she volunteers to join the Red Air Force, and she becomes a bomber pilot, flying a biplane, bombing the Germans at night. Now, this is historical fact. There were women bombers in World War II, and they were known as the Night Witches. And this is, of course, a fictional pilot in The Night Witches. But the story of these brave women flying these planes out in the night and bombing the Germans was completely fascinating. Then there are 2 other storylines. One takes place shortly after World War II ends, and there is he's a British journalist. He's hunting down Nazis. He's sort of an amateur Nazi hunter, but he is bringing them in, and he has his eyes set on this German woman known as the Huntress. She slaughtered 6 children and killed his brother. And then there is a third storyline of a German woman coming to the United States in Boston. She has a small daughter. It is quite clear from the beginning of the story that this German woman is almost certainly the Huntress. It was a thrilling, good mystery. Not great, but I thoroughly enjoyed the audiobook. But more of that, I really enjoyed the story of the Night Witches. There may be an historical book that tells more about them, and I really should look that up. Okay, that is my reading report from May 31st to April 13th. Thank you so much for watching, and keep on reading.